fight fans, to another episode of BTR Boxing Podcast with me, your host, Sean Bastow, joined by Johnston Brown. This is our new series for BTR Boxing Podcast, Career Profiles. We're going to be going through the career profiles of some of the greatest fighters that ever lived, and we'll be putting polls out every single week for you, the listeners, to vote on it on Twitter at BTR Boxing Pod. And we're going to be starting off with the greatest, Muhammad Ali. But first, before we get into this episode, please go and find us on social media. First of all on Twitter at BTR Boxing Pod and on Facebook at BTR Boxing Podcast. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, and if you already have, thank you so much. If you've not already rated and reviewed us, please go and do it. If this is the first time you're listening to us, please go and leave us a rating and leave us a review. If you're not on Apple and you're on Android, any good podcasting app out there, Podbean, Stitcher, Spreaker, Player FM, even Spotify, and Eat Sleep Boxing Repeats YouTube channel. You can find us on there and subscribe to get all the latest episode of all our different series that we run. So this is it then. This is the first in a new series of career profiles. We're going to be profiling the greatest, Mr. Muhammad Ali.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, from Louisville, Kentucky, wearing black tie, Mr. Cassius Marcellus Clay. His classic poem, I Am the Greatest.
This kid's got a left. This kid's got a right. If he hits you once, you're asleep for the night. This kid fights great. He's got speed and endurance. But if you sign to fight him, increase your insurance.
So Johnston, this is our new series, Career Profiles, and we're starting with the greatest, Muhammad Ali. And what a fighter to start with. What an absolute enigma of a man to start with when it comes to career profiles.
He was the greatest. He was charismatic, he was outspoken, he was exceptionally gifted. And as you said once, he was handsome, he was fast, and he couldn't possibly be beat. And to be quite honest, you couldn't think of anyone better than Muhammad Ali to do this career profile with. Brilliant, great pick from both of us. So we haven't put it out as a poll, but we'll do that for the next load. But great, eagerly anticipated to get this one in, and what a fantastic person and a great fighter.
Indeed, and we will go into him as a man, as a fighter very shortly. So the format of this career profiles then for you, the listeners, is really we decided we wanted to sit down and go through the careers of fighters like Ali, many other fighters out there, and as Johnston just touched on there, we're going to be doing polls every week like we do with Legendary Nights. We'll put a poll out, 4 fantastic fighters, legendary fighters, and you will pick the fighter you want us to do the career profile on. And the way we're going to do these career profiles is we're going to obviously do a little bit of background in the early years. We're going to look at where they came from, what it was like for them growing up, and then their boxing careers going into what made them into their sort of statuses that we know them as today. So we're going to talk about early careers, any amateur achievements, significant fights. Now obviously we've got the Legendary Nights series. If you've not already heard it, go and check it out. But we've got the Legendary Nights series which has covered off some of the fights that you may hear in things like Muhammad Ali's career profile or say a Sugar Ray Leonard profile. We've covered fights off of these guys before, so if you want more detailed analysis of particular fights of their careers, go and check out the Legendary Nights series for that. But this is going to be more of a run through of some of the significant events that happened inside and outside the ring of these fighters' careers. And as we said, we're starting with the greatest. Who else could we have started with really for this? There's no one else out there that you could say would justify doing a career profile on. This is the man that everybody would love to sit at a dinner table with, a conversation with, any sort of interaction with. This is the man you would have wanted to be around, and I'm really pleased to be doing this career profile on Muhammad Ali, aka Cassius Clay. We'll go into the background of Muhammad Ali first of all. I think that's where we want to start with, Johnston. We want to start off where it all began for him, and I mentioned Cassius Clay there. For anybody that's been living under the rock for the lifetime, Cassius Clay was obviously the original name of Muhammad Ali. So he was born Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr. on January the 17th, 1942 in Louisville, Kentucky, and he was a sibling with one sister four brothers, and he also had a father named Cassius Marcellus Clay Sr. as well. And you heard a lot about his career and some of the stuff he talked about in his career, the fact that he came from descendants of slaves, and he was very much against the name because he believed it was a slave name, and that's why he eventually ended up changing his name to Muhammad Ali. It was actually true, doing a little bit of digging and a bit of research on Muhammad Ali's career and stuff that I did know and stuff that I didn't know. I was very surprised to actually see he did actually have descendants from the slave trade era, and I can understand why when we get into his career and we talk about people like Ernie Terrell calling him Cassius Clay to his face and the whole debacle there, why he was so, why he got his back up so much about it all. Now I can understand truly why he got his back up so much about it all, because of the background of it all and, the whole disgusting slave trade that went on hundreds of years ago. But where it began for him then, Johnston, we've heard many stories about his upbringing, his background. What are the stories that you originally heard about Muhammad Ali?
Well, one that what got him into boxing was one that always struck me. At the age of 12 years old, he actually got his brand new bike stolen from him. So he actually reported it to the nearest policeman at the time. And he was, Ali at 12 years old, pretty much as he was, sort of as we know how he is, how he was. So he was sort of giving threat to the policeman what he's going to do to the thief when he catches him. And ironically, the policeman actually he run an amateur boxing program. So he suggested might be a good idea for Cassius to come and learn some boxing before sort of get himself. If he wants to beat up the thief, then let's get him prepared to fight the thief if he ever sort of locked arms with him. So sooner or later he did go to the gym regularly, and within sort of 6 weeks he had his first amateur fight at the age of 12 years old, and he done just enough to win. But as Cassius Clay, or Muhammad, Cassius Clay as he was then, he was very outspoken, and he was telling everybody he's going to be the greatest in the world. So Clay being Clay, he sees something in himself early doors, and he displayed a remarkable self-discipline in his training, running. He was doing a lot of running in the mornings. He's going to the gym and sparring after school. So he showed he had something at the age of 12, and obviously that carried on to the point of when he was 18, and then he got into the amateur scene, and then obviously fought in 6 prestigious Golden Gloves titles at state level and national level before moving on to the Olympics.
The Olympics was where he became a breakout star as a boxer. I think we knew him as an outspoken fighter. We always known him as that because we didn't grow up in that era. But, when you look at all the videos, all the documentaries, everything that is out there, and there's plenty of it, you can go there and look at to get an insight into the man's mind. And like you say, from the age of 12, he always had this charismatic side of him where you kind of looking back on some of the historical stuff interview-wise of his, you always kind of knew, even in the early interviews, that he was going to go on to do something special in the sport. And his first breakout moment obviously came in the 1960 Summer Olympics in Rome, when he won a light heavyweight gold medal.
In a few moments, the judges' votes will be tallied and the winner will receive amateur boxing's highest award, the Olympic gold medal. The decision goes to Cassius Clay of the United States. Pietrkowski graciously congratulates him, and then Ziggy's cornermen also acknowledge Clay's masterful boxing exhibition. Just moments later in the award ceremony, the fighters take their places on the victory stand. Cassius Clay has presented the coveted gold medal for his tremendous victory in the light heavyweight division of the Olympic Boxing Championships. A magnificent conclusion to the 1960 Rome Olympics.
And, that was it. That was where his career started from, really, for me. That was where it really started to pick up because, there's great interviews around of him, winning the gold medal and talking about what he wanted to do going forward. And his amateur record was pretty outstanding, to be honest with you, at this period of time. He finished his amateur career with 100 wins and only 5 losses. Now that, for me, is quite incredible, quite outstanding. I mean, people refer to this day and age and the amateur scene and some of the fighters out there that have been incredible amateurs, but we're talking 50, 60, 70 years ago here. You know, this is a very long time ago. Boxing was different, rules and regulations were different, and for him to have gone in and had 105 fights, winning 100 and only losing 5, what a great amateur career, topping it off with that gold medal in the Olympics.
Yeah, and he literally breezed through the Olympics in at that light heavyweight division. He took that gold medal with almost ease. And there was a funny story as well that apparently he was absolutely petrified of flying. So when they eventually took him into board the plane, apparently he insisted that he wanted to wear a parachute during the flight, just in case it crashed. So you can imagine Ali wearing a parachute all the way. And when he actually did arrive in Rome as well, he tied it with a great line. He said, I don't worry about the fight, I just worry about the flights. So he had that great tongue from early age, and he just I think, you know, many people considered him at the time to be a bit of a cocky little git, but and not many believed it, you know, in what he was saying. I don't think many felt that he had the ability to do the things that he suggested, but boy were they wrong, and he did just carry on that characteristic, that unbelievable side to him that no one can compare with. He just had this aura about him that no other fighters have ever had, and it was literally from that moment winning that gold medal, and he was on the verge of turning pro.
Well, there was a story about the gold medal that was disputed, and I'll tell you the story and the listeners the story about what apparently was reported at the time. So when he returned from the Rome Olympics in 1960, a couple of weeks afterwards, apparently he threw his gold medal into the Ohio River after he and a friend were refused service at a white-only restaurant and fought with a white gang. Now, this was the story that was disputed. This was being said as it never happened. It was bullshit, basically. But the real story, according to Thomas Hauser in his biography of Ali, stated that Ali was refused service at the diner, but he actually lost his medal a year after he won it. Ali did go on to receive a replacement medal at a basketball intermission during the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta, which is something we'll touch on a little bit later on down the line about his involvement in that particular Olympics. So again, you know, there's so many different stories that, you know, you'd heard about him, and this was one that I didn't actually know. I didn't know that, you know, there was rumours of him throwing his own gold medal into the lake. I can't see him have done that, to be honest with you. I think that was, again, it was just a made-up story to get attention and to get press, to be honest. It's more than likely, you know, the truth is that he lost it for whatever reason, however it happened, and, you know, he did go on to get a replacement of it. But it was just a bit of an interesting story. I mean, obviously he was very much for the Black Power movement, and obviously that particular era, without being too political about it, was a very difficult era for people of colour, because obviously, you know, they were told they can't sit in a bus, they were told they couldn't do this, they were told they couldn't do that. The police, you know, always pulled them over. Even today it still happens. But again, let's not go too political into it, but it's the truth, and that's what was happening back then, which still happens now, and that's something that we'll talk about later on down the line as he battles through it outside of the ring in his career. So as you say, he makes his professional debut on October the 29th, 1960, winning a 6-round decision over Tony Hunsaker, and from then until the end of 1963 he amassed a record of 19-0 with 15 wins by knockout. He defeated boxers which included Tony Esperetta, Jim Robinson, Donnie Fleeman, Alonzo Johnson, George Logan, Willie Besmanoff, Lamar Clark, Doug Jones, and our very own good old Henry Cooper.
Yes, Henry Cooper, goodness, yeah. He came over with that again. He was pretty cocky. I mean, he was predicting, he went through them fights. He predicted several of them fights. I believe before he fought Charlie Powell, he had predicted 7 of the 8 fights that he had won. So he was getting the rounds right, which was all part of the enigma of Muhammad Ali, or Cassius Clay as he was at the time. But he said he'd get rid of him in 5. He said that he actually came into the ring as well wearing a crown, and he said, like, afterwards he said, you have a Queen of England but you don't have a king. So that was why he came in wearing the crown. And you know, I think he came with a little bit. He was a bit cocky because Angelo Dundee recently, I did hear that he said, you know, you've got to be careful with Henry Cooper, especially that left hook. It's a dangerous left hook, and he was like, nah, come on, I can dance around him all day. And then,
well, Henry Cooper's nothing but a tramp. He's a bum. I'm the world's greatest. He must fall in 5 rounds, but if you talk about me, I'll cut it 3.
Your prediction about Doug Jones didn't go quite right, though.
Well, Doug Jones was a little tougher than I thought he was, but I'll never fight another fella as tough as Doug Jones, not even that big ugly bear Sonny Liston.
Is he your next fight?
Well, after I annihilate this Henry Cooper, I want that bear.
And what's going to happen to him?
Bad.
What's going to happen to him?
He might be great, but he'll fall in 8.
And what after that? President of the United States?
Well, no, I'll never shoot for nothing like that, but I'm the prettiest fighter in the ring today. That's my label.
Obviously, we all know that Emery's hammer, it landed in the 4th round. And there's a few, thankfully, for Ali, he landed on the ropes, and it was right at the end of the round, because who knows if Henry Cooper had have won that fight and finished off Cassius Clay at the time, because, you know, that fight was, everybody was talking about Sonny Liston, so that could have been Henry Cooper instead of Muhammad Ali, literally just before the Sonny Liston fight. So, but as we know, he eventually did recover. It was a little bit longer. I mean, people did mention, obviously, the smelling salts, they were around at the time, that you were allowed to use them. And he did actually manage an extra 6 seconds at the break. I think people have mentioned 20 or 30 seconds, which is not true. It was just only the 6 seconds. Also, there was a slight slit on the glove. Obviously, we all know Henry Cooper was susceptible to cut. Angelo Dundee didn't say that he had cut it open. He said there was a slit there, and he may have just made it a little bit wider. So, as you know, when Ali threw them jabs and them right hands, he would glance them shots. So, you know, opening that cut nicely on Henry Cooper's eye, which eventually stopped. The referee stopped the fight. And if anyone has never seen this fight, watch the first fight. It is at Wembley Stadium, and Henry Cooper's face is an absolute picture. It's brutal, and the referee was absolutely right to stop it. But unlucky for Henry, because he's one of my idols. He lived in Bellingham, which weren't too far from me. I literally ran my neck of the woods. He's a bit of an idol for me. So I was obviously, I'm not around at the time, but unfortunately he couldn't have got the job done and beat Cassius Clay. But you know, Cassius Clay, what a great guy he was. So, end of the day, they become great friends in the long run. But, interesting. If he could have won that fight, who knows? He could have gone on to Fort Liston. That would have been a nice fight.
But what was interesting about looking back on his career in more detail than the major marquee fights that everybody knows when they hear, like, the Thriller and Manila, you know, we've got other information that I was very surprised at, and actually it doesn't really come across in most of the documentaries. The fact that Archie Moore, former professional heavyweight himself, was actually the original trainer before Angelo Dundee of Muhammad Ali, and that's something actually even I never knew. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I've got a breadth of knowledge when it comes to boxing history, but this was something I didn't originally know until looking in further down the line. So he actually ended up going on to beat Archie Moore. Now, the reason he actually left Moore camp was actually because Archie Moore had asked him to do chores such as washing the dishes and sweeping. So he basically said, nope, I ain't doing this. I ain't doing no sweeping, I ain't doing no cleaning, and decided to ditch the Archie Moore side and decided to go with Angelo Dundee to be his trainer. And they'd already met before previously, Dundee and Ali. They actually met in February 1957 during Clay's amateur career at the time. So it was around this time that Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, had sought his long-time Sugar Ray Robinson to be his manager. But that didn't happen. That was, you know, crazy to think, like, some of these names that we're throwing out here, like Angelo Dundee, you know, he'd already met him in the amateurs. He ends up going on to become his trainer, and the rest is history, as we'll talk about. And then he actually tried to get Sugar Ray Robinson to be his manager, and that is something, again, I didn't know. I didn't have no clue of that, and I was very surprised to read about that when I was doing the research for the episode. And, you know, Sugar Ray Robinson arguably is classed as one of the greatest, if not the greatest. When you do the pound for pounds, some people actually put Ray Robinson above Muhammad Ali in these top 10 pound for pounds of all time. So, you know, that just says it all. You know, Muhammad Ali looked up to Sugar Ray Robinson and wanted him to be his manager, and he had Angelo Dundee as his trainer.
Wow, I never knew that. I never knew. One thing I do recall is he did mention, obviously, Sugar Ray Robinson was his idol, and he bumped into him, and he wasn't too polite. He sort of fogged him off when he was a kid. So he didn't quite like that, and he always said that, you know, with him, when he's famous and people want to speak to him, he'd always give people his time. So that's interesting. That you know, I'm with you. I mean, for me, I will put Sugar Ray Robinson ahead of Muhammad Ali when it comes to pound for pound. If you're talking about in terms of not just fighting, we're talking in terms of with everything and the whole what the persona and, you know, what a guy brings in and outside the ring, then obviously Ali is the greatest without a shadow of a doubt. But for me, Sugar Ray Robinson is the best. But yeah, that's interesting. I never knew that.
So after he beats Henry Cooper, which was in 1963, he gets his shot at a world title. Now this was where things started to become very interesting for his career. At this point, he'd obviously got himself into a position. He was very brash, he was very cocky. This is where we start to get to see some of the great lines come out of Muhammad Ali. So he was the number one contender for the WBC, WBA heavyweight titles. The champion at the time, Sonny Liston, the very feared Sonny Liston, I might add. This was a guy who was a monster. This was a guy who he was knocking everybody out for fun. Sonny Liston, in the lead up to the first fight with him, you know, he'd been knocking people out for the fun of it. Absolutely knocking people out for the fun of it. But there's always the story of Sonny Liston's sort of tarnished career, of, you know, his affiliation with the mobsters back in that particular era, and, you know, the theories of how he actually died. There's a lot of stuff we could even talk about with Sonny Liston, but for this particular episode, focusing on Muhammad Ali, the Sonny Liston fight was huge for him, because he was the young pup. He was the guy that was coming through with all the confidence in the world. He was ready for it. He was absolutely ready for this at this time. And you look back on the videos and the interviews, this was just, it was like it was always meant to be. When, you know, people believe things happen for a reason, or they believe in fate, and I think this was the part of fate and things that were supposed to happen for a reason. It was always gonna be Muhammad Ali winning against Sonny Liston for me. You know, when I look back on everything I've ever read or ever looked at, the way he come into that, he was the underdog. He was a 7-1 underdog, but he didn't give a shit about that. He was taunting Liston during the pre-fight build-up. He's calling him the big ugly bear, and Liston even smells like a bear, and he was saying to him, after I beat him, I'm going to donate him to the zoo.
I'm young, I'm handsome, I'm fast, I'm pretty, and can't possibly be beat.
You might be young and handsome, but you won't be after I finish with you.
If you like to lose your money, be a fool and bet on Sonny.
I'm pretty sure people's not a fool to bet on you. They have to be a fool and bet on me.
You're 40 years old if a day, and you don't belong in the ring with Cassius Clay.
No, I shouldn't, because it'd be a disgrace to see let the people see me kill you like I am.
The odds should be 3.5 to 1 that you won't show up for the fight.
The odds should be 10-0 that you don't last for the first round.
He was really sort of uptight for that weigh-in the morning before the fight. He was going berserk, wasn't he? I'm ready to rumble now, he's saying. And you know, and even when he got examined by the doctor actually said that in his opinion the fighter was scared to death. He said, Muhammad Ali, he's petrified. That's why his heart's beating so fast. But it was all part of, you know, the game that Cassius Clay at the time. I mean, we've got to call him Clay, I suppose, at the moment. He hadn't changed his name yet, but it was all part of the plan. And when sort of in and around his team, his cornerman did ask him, like, what are you playing at? Why are you acting like a nutcase? And he sort of said, because Liston thinks I'm a nut. He's scared of no man, but he's scared of a nut. So in his head, he's thinking, I'm going to get in Liston's head, and therefore, if he's a bit scared of me, then, you know, hopefully, you know, playing them mind games. That's what he did. And you know, you've got to remember, Liston was feared, wasn't he? He was an absolute monster in the ring. He literally destroyed Floyd Patterson in those two fights. You know, and nobody gave Clay a chance. It was a big upset. Everybody was against him. No one thought he was going to last 2 rounds with him. I mean, Liston had fought 3 fights. Liston had fought just 3 fights in a total of 6 minutes and 14 seconds in 3 years, whereas Clay had fought 14 times, including 3 10-rounders. So, you know, when you look at that, you got to think, actually, you know, Liston's not really been active, although he's been blasting people out. So in people's heads, they're thinking he's just going to get rid of him in no time. But in actual fact, you look at that, and as you say, like when you look through it now, obviously we all know how great he became. But how was he such an underdog? And I think for me, it was because of the way he was and the way he carried himself. You know, at that time in the 60s, you know, that wasn't how they expected to act. And you think Floyd Patterson, they loved Floyd Patterson because he was respectful. That's basically how they see it. He had to be nice and respectful to his opponents and to the press. And, you know, Ali wasn't. So for them, they didn't like him and they hated him for that. They hated him being so boastful. But that, you know, that was what makes him so great, is that he took himself out of this stereotype of what you're supposed to be. And he created this guy. It was a persona because he was a lovely guy. In actual fact, it's just in front of the cameras, he would act up like this. But, you know, he even talks about Gorgeous George. Gorgeous George was a guy he watched for years in wrestling, and people hated him and had paid to go and watch Gorgeous George, and he never quite understood, if people hate someone, why are they paying? And they're like, well, they want to see him get beat. So he thought, well, if I'm act like Gorgeous George, and everyone's going to want to come and pay tickets to go and watch me get beat, it's good business. They thought, I'm going to do that. And that's what he did. So he done it brilliantly for Sonny Liston, and well, you know, I mean, you could touch on the fight, Sean, but it was a great fight as well, and he was just outstanding. There was things that happened in the fight as well, which again was a little bit sus, which I don't know if you want to talk about, Sean, but there was a couple of incidents in there with the gloves, and yeah, it was an interesting first fight.
It was significant in his career because it was the first time he'd become heavyweight champion of the world. So he did win this fight, obviously, that's what history tells us. But as you were talking about and alluding to some of the stories in there, yeah, there was one major story that came out of this one. There's two. The first one was the fact that he cut Liston, which had never been done before. Liston never suffered a cut in his career. So the fact that he got through and cut Liston was huge. You know, this was a guy who was essentially invincible, like a monster and all the rest of it, and he cut him. And this is where things started to change in the fight. The corner of Liston used some sort of ointment that was supposed to be used for his cut on his eye, and rumour has it, and I say that very strongly, rumour has it that they actually, you know, this ointment was used and smeared a little bit on the gloves of Liston. So when Liston was throwing shots at Cassius Clay, when he was connecting, they were getting through. And at the end of the fourth round, Cassius Clay is coming back to his corner complaining that his eyes are burning. They're really, really burning. He's actually slightly blinded him as a result. And then what happened was Liston decides to come out and try to knock Clay out, and he's really going for it. He's really going for it in this one because they obviously know that there's something up with Clay's eyes. Now it begs the question whether all the shady mob stuff had something to do with it. We'll never ever know the real story behind it all, but it does look and sound very, very suspect. Cassius Clay was able to survive that fifth round and eventually got into the sixth, dominated Liston, absolutely dominated him in the sixth round to the point where he didn't want to come out for the seventh, and that was him winning his first world title by TKO. And this is where the legacy really, really begins for me then, is this first Liston fight, is the win and the confidence going into it, people thinking he ain't got a chance against him, and for him to come out on top the way he did, with that adversity in the fight as well, with obviously the slight blindness of the eyes because of this ointment. Again, we don't know if it was true, I'm just putting it out there. It's a lot of theories going around that it was ointment that was purposely put on there to blind the opponents of Liston, because Cassius Clay wasn't the first opponent to have complained that this had happened to them as well, so that made you suspect things a little bit more. But yeah, he goes on to become the heavyweight champion of the world for the very first time.
I'm the greatest thing that ever lived. I don't have a mark on my face, and I upset Sonny Liston, and I just turned 22 years old. I must be the greatest. I told the world, I talk to God every day. If God's with me, can't nobody be against me. I shook up the world. I know God. I know the real God.
Cassius, wait a minute, Cassius. Let me ask you this now. You told me when you visited in Los Angeles you could do it in 8. Well, you thought Sonny and figured Sonny was great. How come you did it in 6 or 7? You did it in 7.
I had him going in 8. I was getting ready to take him in the 8th, as you can see. But the man stopped it just to keep from making me look so great.
I see. Now, give us that poetry on number 7.
He wanted to go to heaven, so I took him in 7.
You took him in 7.
I am the king of the world.
Hold it.
I'm pretty.
Hold it. You're not that pretty.
I'm a bad man.
Wait.
I shook up the world. I shook up the world. I shook up the world.
Yeah, and he dethroned Sonny Liston. He was an absolute beast, and no one could believe it. And the strange thing was that Sonny Liston wasn't very liked. He was, as you say, he had links with the mob, and even when he fought Patterson, those two fights, especially the first one, they hated Liston. They didn't like him. So this was actually the first time when Liston came out to fight Clay in the first fight. He actually came out to cheers for once in his career. It's quite weird for him. It must have been unusual for him. But unbelievable. Great performance from Clay. And as you say, he come from the adversity with the ointment, and whether we'll never know whether it was deliberate or not. And then obviously went on into the second one, which again was full of controversy because obviously we get that famous the Phantom Punch, and whether did he take a dive? I don't know. Did he? I've watched the fight. I've seen the punch several times myself. It's difficult. Many people say that with that shot, I mean, I've never been caught with it, so I can't necessarily say whether it would put me down, but that shot just sort of near the temple, sort of behind the ear, it apparently can put you down like that. It did look like he went down quite easily, though, didn't it?
Yeah, he did. He really did. For me, it was one of them where you look at it time and time and time again. Whatever angle you look at it and however you want to theorise over it, it does look very much like he took a dive in this fight. And that's my honest opinion of it. I think he did. I think he took a dive, and we kind of know, even all these years down the line, that there was all this shady mob stuff going on, and there's so many different stories about how literally the mob had him tied up money-wise all the way up until his death. This made me think that he was told to throw the fight basically in a certain round, and obviously Ali went to catch him with a shot, and I think it looked like it really just skimmed his whiskers. And I'm not being funny, right, but when he's on the floor and Ali stood over him shouting him, why would he do that? Why would he shout at him telling him to get up if he knew he'd hit him cleanly? If he felt like he'd hit him cleanly enough to knock him down, he would have gone straight to the neutral corner. He didn't. That's the thing, he didn't. You watch it and he shouts over him, and then there's the iconic picture as well that we see of him stood over Liston shouting at him. So, to me, I always feel like this was a little bit of a thrown fight from Liston's perspective, and probably because he had his hands tied with the whole mob situation. But for obviously Cassius Clay Muhammad Ali, this was a massive moment. He absolutely dethroned Sonny Liston. Two fights in a row, beats Sonny Liston, and then this is where he starts to go on this fantastic run, and we start to get some of these significant fights in his career before we get to the point where we talk about the exile and the whole situation that happened outside of the ring. So his next fight was significant because it was Floyd Patterson, former professional, former world champion. He was the youngest ever world champion, 21 years of age, before Mr. Mike Tyson came along and smashed that record years later. And just to touch back on the second fight between Clay and Liston, the referee, did you notice who it was?
Yes, Jersey Joe Walcott.
Yeah, Jersey Joe Walcott was the referee for Clay Liston too. That was crazy, absolutely crazy for that.
He was. I mean, that's another thing that makes me think, why did Jersey Joe officiate this fight as well? Which that makes me think as well, this is not quite, so it's not quite right, is it? Because I don't think he had officiated many fights. I mean, I might be wrong here. Had he? I don't think he had.
No, I don't know how many fights he'd officiated, and I don't think I'd be able to find that information. I think that'd be difficult to find the information. Yeah. I don't know if you'd be able to find the actual information. You might be able to find some stuff on BoxRec for that, but no, I don't know. But it's at this point, actually, that we've not mentioned that the change of his name actually happened between the first and second fight with Liston. He actually, first of all, changed his name from Clay to Cassius X, and then decided to change it to Muhammad Ali. That is when he converted to Islam and affiliated himself with the Nation of Islam at this point. And this is where he'd become Muhammad Ali now, and this is, again, the legacy from here on in. He's just, again, something to behold, really. So he beats Sonny Liston twice, gets to Floyd Patterson, beats Floyd Patterson. This is it's quite a sad story with Patterson, because he fought Patterson twice. He fought Patterson after he'd beat Sonny Liston, and he fought him in 1965, but he did actually go on to fight him again in 1972. But the second fight, he actually put that fight together, Muhammad Ali, to help out Floyd Patterson, because Floyd Patterson was actually really, really struggling at the time.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, and Floyd was another. It was a great fight. I mean, for his era, sort of the late 50s, he was the man, wasn't he? He was the heavyweight champion, and as you say, yeah, he did. He came under, he come from some difficult times. But again, that's Muhammad Ali. He puts this persona out there that he's this. He sort of talks down to people and he says some inappropriate stuff, but in actual fact, in the background, he's always doing things to try and help others, and that was him all over. That doesn't surprise me that he would jump on a fight just to help Patterson. I think even in that 72 fight, I don't want to jump too far here, but I think he sort of even said he prolonged the fight a little bit to make it as entertaining as he could, which is just typical of him. But I suppose, just one other thing we didn't touch on as well, which I just literally slipped my mind, was before, as you say, he did change his name. He was travelling around sort of Egypt, Ghana, Nigeria, and obviously Malcolm X has been to a few of his fights as well. But there was real fears as well for Ali's life when he had changed his name. So, there was massive fears that he was going to be assassinated before and even during that Listings fight, the second fight. So, yeah, well, I sort of went over that. We jumped on a bit too quickly. But, yeah, moving back to Patterson, I mean, again, we talk about the great quotes from Muhammad Ali. And he did come up with a beauty for the Patterson fight, which was, if Floyd dreamed he could beat me, he would apologise.
Typical Ali, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. So we can move on then, and we get another heavyweight defence of his title with a very, very tough George Chuvalo, and then he fights Henry Cooper for a second time, beats Henry Cooper more emphatically in the second time around, but then he comes back again to the UK after the Cooper fight, fights at Earls Court, beats Brian London, stops him, and then this is sort of leading into the Ernie Terrell fight, which is something I wanted to focus on. Not so much the fight, but something that we've touched on in one of our previous episodes of obviously Muhammad Ali, talking about the incident where obviously they're on telly and they're talking. Like I know we've covered it off before in the best boxing brawls episode, but I can't help but not say anything about it again because it was significant, really, because of the fact that he was calling him Cassius Clay on live television. Muhammad Ali had changed his name. He didn't want to be disrespected in that way, and then obviously goes into the ring and absolutely takes the piss out of Ernie Terrell, batters him from pillar to post while screaming "What's my name?" all the way through the fight. So, it was a significant fight because it was him sort of stamping his authority about the fact he changed his name and that some people still regarded him as Cassius Clay. Even a lot of TV companies still regarded him as Cassius Clay, and magazines as well were still calling him Cassius Clay at this point. It's like they refused to accept his conversion to Islam. They refused to accept the fact that he took an Islamic name as opposed to taking his original name, which he said was a slave name, going back to his descendancy, talking about the slave trade 200, 300 years ago. So obviously it was significant in his career, and then moving on, he goes in and fights one more time before we get to the whole exile situation against Zora Folley, stops Zora Folley, and then this is where we get the significant event, which I felt like this was a very, very pivotal moment in the career of Muhammad Ali, not just in his career but in his life. This was, for me, something that I'd have to stand up and applaud the guy for, something that so many people in this day and age have, their own thoughts about how government should deal with certain situations that happen in the world. And in March 1966, Ali refused to be inducted into the armed forces, and as a result, he was systematically denied a boxing license in every state, stripped of his passport. He didn't fight then for 3 years as a result of this.
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, it was in 1966 as well when he came up with that quote, because obviously that they were saying he was eligible for the military draft, and he should prepare himself for service in Vietnam. And in 1966, I think it was just before or just after the Cooper fight, and that was when he said, "Man, I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong." Terrible American accent I've got there, but so that didn't go down too well either. And then obviously, one other thing as well, I'm sure it was like 1964. I mean, Ali actually went through a military exam, which is something that they all, if I remember right, I think it was like a mandatory thing they had to do. But he was actually told that he wouldn't be able to join the forces because he didn't pass the exam. So 2 years before that, you got these guys that weren't eligible because they weren't clever enough to then the next point where they're like, right, well, you know, you are clever enough, you can go now. So, you know, it didn't go down great, obviously, with what he was saying. But, you know, the whole thing was, he see through it almost. I mean, we can say that now because, you know, it was a dreadful war, and it was literally no point in loads of young men died for a crazy cause. It just didn't make no sense. But so you could, you know, we look at it now in hindsight, and we can see that what Ali he believed in, and he stood by it, and you've got to give him the utmost respect for it. Obviously, you know, as you say, at 25 years old, he's stripped of his license. And you know, 3 years out of the ring, it's hard to believe. It beggars belief, really, that he was out of the ring for as long as he was at the age of 25 years old. So yeah, I mean, even if you talk about Zara Foley as well, so that was the last fight. I mean, just jumping off the subject, but Foley actually he died a mysterious swimming pool incident at just age 41. So it weren't just listing that guys of, you know, all these mysterious deaths. This is a weird time when you do get these crazy stories that come out. But yeah, obviously it was good looking like he was going to go down, you know, go prison, but obviously he didn't do his time. He got a $10,000 fine as well, and he ended up becoming Jimmy Ellis's sparring partner just to keep him active, because obviously Jimmy Ellis was Angelo Dundee. So and he kept himself busy, going off to universities, doing talks. But yeah, really, really sad because you just don't know what could have happened in those 3 years.
But let's just take a little pause for one moment to give a shout out to the sponsors for BTR Boxing Podcast. It's Bear Attack Boxing, providing high quality boxing gloves, boxing equipment to your suitable needs. You can find them at www.bearattackboxing.co.uk and all over social media. You've got the Fight Pro 1 gloves, the Pluto gloves, the new Bear Attack Boxing t-shirt range, the inner gloves, the hand wraps, some great boxing products on there. So go and check them out. And also, we've got a little present for you. Because you're a loyal listener to BTR Boxing Podcast, we've got an exclusive discount code for you. Now, it's a 10% discount, and all you've got to do is when you're at the checkout and you've got them boxing gloves and that t-shirt in there that you want to buy, go onto the promo code and enter BTR10 for 10% off. And 10% is not something to be scoffed at in this day and age. It can definitely get you a few quid off them high quality products that Bear Attack Boxing are selling. So, as a loyal listener to BTR Boxing Podcast, when you buy or purchase something through Bear Attack Boxing's website, in the promo code, enter BTR10 and you will get an exclusive 10% discount off your basket. So please go and take advantage of it. Follow them on social media, Bear Attack Boxing, and it's bearattackboxing.co.uk. Yeah, and one particular thing that he did during that hiatus from the ring due to him being denied a boxing licence was the super fight, Rocky Marciano and Muhammad Ali. So, what the story is behind this one is, while he was banned from sanctioned bouts, now there was a $1 million lawsuit against a radio producer, Murray Warona. So he decided to settle this lawsuit by accepting a $10,000 fee to appear in a privately staged fantasy fight against the retired champion Rocky Marciano. So in 1969, the boxers were filmed sparring for about 75 one-minute rounds, and they acted out several different ways this was going to end, and the whole thing was it was going to be a computer-generated result at the end of it by all these different filmings that they'd done, all these different scenarios of how this could possibly go there, and obviously Rocky Marciano retired an undefeated heavyweight champion of the world at 49-0. You know, his record was I still believe his record's the original record. I mean, Floyd Mayweather in this day and age is 50-0, but I don't think, you know, it's justified 50-0, and that's reasons we'll talk about somewhere else down the line. But 49-0, undefeated heavyweight champion of the world. Muhammad Ali, heavyweight champion of the world. Yes, he was stripped of everything at this point, but he was still regarded as the best on the planet. And they went and did this video, which was a huge deal back then, because when it eventually went on to be released in 1970, it was shown in movie theatres, so people were going to the movies to watch this particular thing, a computer simulated fight between these two who would just basically spar a load of rounds together. So there was two versions. There was a USA version where Ali actually lost in a simulated 13th round knockout, but there was also a European version which Marciano lost due to cuts, which was also simulated. So it was quite funny, because Ali suggested that it was quite prejudice when determining the defeat in the US version of it. It was reported to jokingly say the computer was made in Alabama. So, you know, he was always witty. He was always great at bringing out these fantastic quotes. But the super fight, you know, I have actually watched it, the super fight. I have actually sat down and watched the super fight. I've got to be honest, it's not great. I'm not going to lie, because it's made in an era where technology was totally different than what we're all spoilt with today. But just the respect, man, the respect these two guys had doing all these rounds together for this simulated fantasy fight. And obviously, Marciano would then eventually go on to pass away in a plane crash in, I think it was 1969. I'm pretty sure it was the same year actually that they filmed it, because I remember that he wasn't alive when the super fight was actually released. So which was 1970, he died in a plane crash, so he never ended up getting to see it, unfortunately. But obviously people who were fans of Marciano from the generation just past, you know, they all wanted to see it. They all wanted to see old guard against new guard, and it was a big thing. It was a really big thing back then.
Yeah, it was, and I watched it, and it is pretty bad. I mean, it depends what your standard is. If you go into it and you watch it, if you don't watch it and you think it's not going to be great, you're actually quite pleasantly surprised. I actually went into things worse than it was. So, if anyone wants to watch it, I'd recommend that you could watch it, and it's quite good fun. It's all tongue in cheek at the end of the day. It would have been great to have actually seen Ali, against Rocky, but. It wasn't to be, obviously. It was a bit of different eras, but yeah, it was a bit of fun, wasn't it? It kept him busy, and none of that. It gave him some money in his pocket, because he weren't getting no money. The only way he was actually getting any money was sparring Jimmy Ellis, and obviously doing this little super fight movie thing. So it kept him busy, and obviously as we moved into sort of the last year, I think it was like by about sort of 1969, sort of when they were probably doing the super fight, that sort of public sort of what people felt about the Vietnam War. They felt that actually Ali's probably right here. So it was inevitable that sort of in that last year he was going to return, and obviously at that time it was Joe Frazier. Joe Frazier picked up the title, I believe, for Jimmy Ellis. I think it was 69, or it may have been 70. Might have been 1970 actually, but and Ellis had beaten Quarry to win his version. I think it was a WBA, and the WBC was vacant, and then they put the WBC on the line to unify, and obviously Frazier was the unified champion. Obviously, everybody at the time was saying Muhammad Ali is the true champion, Joe Frazier isn't. So it was building lovely, bubbling nicely for when inevitably they were to share a ring a year later.
Yeah, the fight of the century, that's the one. One of the greatest fights you'll ever see in boxing history, and one that if you've not already seen it, you should go and watch it. Unfortunately, it's not one that's come up in Legendary Nights yet. We have actually done the third fight, the Thriller in Manila, but we've not done the fight of the century as yet with Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali, and it is one I'll look forward to sitting down and breaking down in full later on down the line. But this was the start of what was an epic rivalry, an epic trilogy of fights, and this for me sort of defined that era and that legacy of Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier, because after this, there was never not going to be a second and a third. I've said this before in the Legendary Nights episodes, that this was always meant to be. It was always, as soon as these two guys met, there was just such disdain for each other. It turned from friendship to anger, to all the different mixed emotions you could possibly go through with these two fighters, and it was great because obviously Ali was coming off the back of a few wins as well, so bearing in mind he'd been out for 3 years, he beat Jerry Quarry, he beat Oscar Bonavena, and then he got his shot at Joe Frazier in early 1971. Now this was where you're thinking to yourself, Ali's going to come back, Ali's going to go on and beat Joe Frazier, he's not the real champion, blah, blah, blah. But the fight itself, amazing fight, brilliant fight. We're not going to do a play-by-play of it, of course, but absolutely amazing fight. Joe Frazier ends up decking Muhammad Ali in this fight and goes on to win a 15-round unanimous decision to defend his titles, and yeah, it was a bit of a humbling, I think, for Muhammad Ali, this fight.
Oh, definitely it was. I think he took it too early, personally, when you look at it. I mean, don't get me wrong, Jerry Quarry and Oscar Benavidez were two tough fights to come back after a 3-year exile. I mean, we look at Tyson Fury now. I mean, he had a couple of warm-up fights and went into the Wilder fight, which he done well, but then he's had the two sort of low-key fights after that. Ali wanted to get straight in. He didn't want to waste any time, and Frazier was a dominant champion, and he, I tell you what, if anyone don't believe that Joe Frazier's got probably the best left hook in boxing, then have a watch of this fight, because the amount of times he lands his left hook on Ali is ridiculous. And also credit to Ali for taking those trademark left hooks. And he actually took it to the 15th round. He actually put him down on his arse. So this was a brilliant fight, the fight of the century. I mean, just everything about. I mean, the 1970s at the time, so you had all the colours and you had all the stars had come out, and you had some massive names at ringside. It just looked, it looked brilliant to look at when you actually watch it in colour, and you can actually, rather than just watch the fight, you can actually see like a bit of the build up and stuff. It's brilliant to watch. I think most of it is on YouTube, if I remember rightly. Even that one was on my DVD. I've got somewhere stashed away, but excellent. It really was, and both fighters, they earned 2.5 million, which is the most any fighter had ever earned by a mile. So this, it just shows you it was everywhere. It was the fight of the century for a reason. It just had everything about it. It was just amazing. Not just the fight, but just the whole thing. You can get caught up in it just watching it back on DVD. So yeah, I was really, Frazier, I'm glad in a way he won it. I mean, this is probably the biggest victory of Frazier's career, and it was a humbling for Ali, as you say.
Yeah, definitely was a humbling for him. It's funny because then, obviously, after the loss of Frazier in 1971, he was going to end up fighting Wilt Chamberlain, who's huge, mega basketball star over in America, great basketball player in basketball history over there. He actually challenged Ali to a fight, and it was actually scheduled in for July the 26th of 1971. And obviously, basketball players, huge. This guy was 7'2". He had absolute all the advantages over Ali. 60 pounds heavier, 14-inch difference between the two of them, and Ali, with his mental mind games, was actually able to influence Chamberlain to calling off the bout. He was taunting him, saying things like "timber" and "the tree will fall" during a shared interview between the two of them. So eventually, what they had to do is they had to then get in former sparring partner Jimmy Ellis to step in for that fight. So he ended up fighting Jimmy Ellis and beating Jimmy Ellis on that date instead of fighting Wilt Chamberlain, which I thought was quite a funny story, reading back on that. And I can't imagine what that would have been like. That must have been like the equivalent of Floyd Mayweather versus Conor McGregor. But, Conor McGregor at least had some sort of martial arts and fighting experience, whereas Wilt Chamberlain was a basketball player. So I can't even imagine and begin to imagine what that sort of debacle was like back then. Imagine that in this day and age. I think people would be like, what the hell is this charade?
Yeah, I did see the photo. I did hear what you said about it. That always makes me laugh. And the size difference is really walking through the door and remember to bend down to get through this door, which is hilarious. But yeah, he literally within 10 minutes, he's like, yeah, I ain't gonna fight this guy because it's gonna ruin him before he even steps in the ring, bless him. But yeah, that's just Ali all over. Just these great little stories. And I mean, the other thing as well, which you mentioned, was following the Frazier defeat. Actually, that was when Deer Lake in Pennsylvania. That's when he relocated out there in the log cabins, and he had fresh water and fresh food. He sort of went back to basics. He actually had a couple of rocks as well. He had like a black rock that he called Jack Johnson. Then he had like a white rock that he called Rocky Marciano, and then he had sort of brown rock, which he called Joe Louis. So he actually painted their names on them as well. And he was sort of, there's videos and footage of him sort of in the log cabins and cutting trees down. And some great, that was, if anyone watched Ali with his sparring sort of from this point on, he's always at Deer Lake. And the he gets all his interviews and he's messing about in the ring, and so he obviously felt that he needed to go back to come away from all the sort of the city and the bright lights, from what we see at the fight of the century, to just going back to basics, and it helped him, because obviously he went on a fantastic run compared to Joe Frazier. I mean, the amount of fights he had, I think he had there were like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, almost like 10, 13 fights in within sort of like a year, 2 years, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. It was quite a few fights before he ended up back in with Joe Frazier again. But on the way to fighting Joe Frazier again, he fought Floyd Patterson, as we spoke about earlier, in the second fight to help Floyd Patterson out. And then he beat Joe Bugner. Then he lost to Ken Norton, which I think was significant because obviously that was a big fight for him. He fought Ken Norton, lost to Ken Norton, and then beat him in the return fight, and then moved on to fight Rudy Lubers, which was actually in Jakarta. So this is where he started to sort of go abroad, start fighting in obviously all these different countries, and that's where the sort of the global superstardom from Ali was starting to really come to the forefront, and he was sort of paving the way for what was to come in a couple of years' time. So then we get the second fight with Joe Frazier, which he actually beats Joe Frazier in the second fight. And we've said before, the second fight is probably there's no worse, really. There's no worse of the three, but if you're going to label best to worst in terms of quality and excitement, I think the second fight between the two of them was down there as number 3 for me. Another huge significant part in his career when he faced off against George Foreman at the Rumble in the Jungle.
Yeah, I mean, he was an underdog in the listing fight, and boy, was he an underdog against George Foreman, who had absolutely destroyed Joe Frazier in 2 rounds, was it? Absolutely just battered him around the ring in Jamaica until this, the Rumble in the Jungle. Nobody give him a chance. I mean, you watch the footage of George Foreman just smashing that heavy bag and almost putting a hole in it. That you could see why. I mean, it was just unreal what this guy. You talk about Liston was a monster. Foreman was an absolute monster. I mean, I think someone mentioned about a great fight between Foreman and Tyson. I mean, what a fantasy fight that would have been. I mean, them two in the ring would have been ridiculous, wouldn't it? But Foreman was a beast. He really was, and I'm not surprised Ali went in the way he did, sort of the complete underdog. But once again, that's what he does. He's just a great fighter. As he said, Ali fights great. He's got speed and endurance. If you decide to fight him, increase your insurance. And that is exactly, that is just Ali, my favourite quote. Then they got $5 million each, and 66,000 in attendance. The whole crowd singing Ale Boombaye, the famous roper dope. It was just amazing. And Foreman, who would have thought it? Who in their right mind would stand there and take a beating from George Foreman and try to tire him out to then finish him off in the 8th round? I mean, it's just, you just can't think of anything as ridiculous. But he pulls it off because that's Muhammad Ali and that's what he does. And it's just a great fight in Zaire, and one that will always, you'd always throw. And if you ever want to watch a fight, stick this one on because it's an absolute belter.
It was a belter. Really, really enjoyed that particular fight. It's one that we've covered for Legendary Nights as well, so if you've not already listened to that particular episode for the Legendary Nights series, go and check that one out. We've covered the Rumble in the Jungle. That has been done before. So if you want a more detailed breakdown of this fight, incidents leading up to the fight, go and check out that particular episode. But I agree, great performance, great win from him against all odds, and that's where people start to regard him again as the best in the world, the greatest. There's already talk of this at this point. I think the way he'd come back from all the adverse things that had happened in his career inside and outside the ring to go on to do this was absolutely amazing, when nobody gave him a chance in hell to beat him. And then he just went on a nice little run again, didn't he? He beat Chuck Wepner, Ron Lyle, Joe Bugner again, before we get the third fight with Frazier, the most significant one, the thriller in Manila. It's one we've covered quite recently at Legendary Nights, so please, if you've not already checked the Legendary Nights series out, again, I must stress, go and check it out, because we've got a full breakdown of this particular fight, the build-up and the aftermath of it. But this was a brilliant fight, and a brilliant win for him as well. It was a very grueling fight, and I think this fight for me was the one that sort of, I think both of them left a piece of themselves in the ring that night.
Absolutely. I can't even agree with you more, mate. It was just a brutal fight, and as you say, we've covered it in the Legendary Night series because I'm not surprised eventually eventually that was going to come up. It is one of the greatest fights I've ever seen, and they both were outstanding that night, and credit to the pair of them. But what a great fight, absolute brilliant fight. And Ali went on, and Frazier, obviously, he was already, I think, after that fight from Frazier declined, and obviously Ali managed to carry on, which is sort of unbelievable, really, because after what you've already been through, and that fight in particular, you're sort of thinking maybe it's time to call it a day. But no, Ali just wanted to keep going.
He did want to keep going, and obviously he went on and he had more fights in his career. We had fights with Jimmy Young, we had fights with Ken Norton, Ernie Shavers, one of the hardest punchers in heavyweight boxing history, and actually, a lot of people do regard him as one of the top pound-for-pound punchers in boxing history as well. But interestingly enough, outside of the ring, his celebrity status was huge at this point. We were talking about the Wilt Johnson situation earlier on. He was actually, in 1976, twice in the space of a month, he was involved in different promotional things that were completely different from what he was used to. So during the first 1976, Ali removed his shirt and jacket and confronted professional wrestler Gorilla Monsoon in the ring after his match at a WWF show in the Philadelphia arena. After dodging a few punches, Monsoon put Ali in an aeroplane spin, dumped him to the mat. Ali stumbled to the corner where his associate Butch Lewis convinced him to walk away. So obviously we know it was all a stage, it was all a celebrity thing. Muhammad Ali is one of the biggest guys on the planet at this point in time, so the WWF, or WWE as it's known now, wanted to get him on board to obviously boost up their ratings, which was something they would go on to do a few times with boxers. So this was one thing that he did. And the second thing that he did in June of that year, he actually participated in an exhibition bout against Japanese professional wrestler and martial arts artist Antonio Inoki. And this was a really, really strange one, because this definitely was the original Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather, because this was a guy who knew martial arts against a boxer in Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali actually only landed 2 jabs, while Inoki's kicks actually caused 2 blood clots and an infection, which nearly resulted in Muhammad Ali losing his leg, which is something I never knew about before doing the research for this particular episode of the podcast. I was like, I knew that he'd had this sort of exhibition bout with a professional wrestler, but I didn't realise it ended up being that serious.
No, I didn't. I've watched it. I thought it was absolutely pathetic. I thought, what the hell was this? I found the Trevor Berbick experience in Japan a lot more fun when he didn't want to get kicked and the guy just kept kicking him. He ended up walking out the ring. I thought that was much more fun than this sort of guy just sort of laying around on the floor, sort of kicking at Ali. But obviously, I didn't know that. I didn't know that at all. So that's a turn up for the books. But okay. Well, I mean, that, again, probably that shows you what he's going for. I mean, all the moving around, all the moving about he did, and using his legs, he had that great footwork. It was obviously starting to take its toll then, obviously, with all these fights, and eventually just something so silly like that, a guy kicking you in the legs, and that you could actually amputate. I mean, that's madness. That's unbelievable. But yeah, I mean, it just adds to the Ali story.
It really does add to the story. And as we get into 1977, as I talked about him fighting Ernie Shavers, he managed to beat Ernie Shavers. Very, very tough fight for him, that. And I think at this point of his career, when you watch through the majority of his fights and you start to watch the fights at the latter end, is where it starts to become a little bit concerning, because he's not the same Ali 10 years before. Obviously, age picks up with everybody, but, the movement wasn't as good as it once was, or wasn't as fast as he once was. He was catching more shots than he did before, and against a guy like Ernie Shavers, that was a very grueling fight for him to be involved in. And then a year later, just a few months later, in 1978, he fought 7-fight novice Leon Spinks and lost to Leon Spinks, which was considered one of the greatest upsets in boxing history at that moment in time.
Yeah, that was a shocking one. I think, if I remember rightly, I think it was looking like he was going to fight home then. I believe that's what it was hoped for, or even a Shavers rematch. But neither materialised. And then, actually, it might have been Norton for the third one, if I remember rightly. But in the end, he went for Spinks. And obviously, I think it was a bit of a... It was one of them ones where I think they felt, he's a novice. All right, he's coming out. I think got a gold medal, didn't he? So he was like, would it be an easy defence? And then when you look actually watched the fight, I mean, he looked really old and tired. Saying that, it was still actually quite close, but when you actually see Leon Spinks unloaded on him, you're sort of thinking, oh, this is just, this ain't the Ali that we've seen. And it's obviously, he's slowly starting to deteriorate at this point. But, credit to Ali again. He ends up coming back. Same year, September 15, 1978, and decides gonna take on Spinks again, and this time he does win the fight, and he wins by unanimous decision. And it's hard to believe that Ali could actually beat Spinks after watching that first fight, and you're sort of thinking, goodness me, how's he managed to do that in the condition he was in? And he also became the only man in history to win world heavyweight title 3 times. So he made history, and surely that was it. Now, surely this is the point. I mean, for me, I still feel after the third Frazier fight, he should have called it a day. I think even when he sort of just after the Frazier fight, like Jimmy Ellis, that was a poor fight from him, and I don't know, it just didn't. Or the Jimmy Young fight, so it was a couple of fights later. The Jimmy Young fight, it didn't look right for me. So I think it should have just been the Frazier fight, and that should have been it. But all right, or even the Ken Norton fight. I'm jumping ears, but Ken Norton maybe winning it, the third fight. But you could see there was something not quite right. Even though he beat Spinks, and then obviously you move on to the Holmes and Burbick fights, which were just tragic.
Yeah, they were really, really tragic. After he beat Spinks, and as you say, it made him the first heavyweight champion to win the belt 3 times. On July 27th, 1979, he actually announced his retirement from boxing. And it's at that point where, obviously, if you must have been a fan back then, you must have been cheering, thinking, yes, we need him to retire now. We don't want to see him get hurt. We don't want to see him get, convincingly beaten. But unfortunately, the temptation of coming back to the ring, like any boxer in any day and age, is so tempting, especially when a guy like Ali, who was so charismatic, so the greatest, isn't he? This is it. Let's be honest. We consider him to be the greatest for various reasons, and he just couldn't stay away from the ring. And that was the hard part about this end of his career. Really, was that he went in there to face Larry Holmes for the WBC title. So he wanted to go for the world title for an unprecedented 4th time. So Ali's motivation for this was money. It was as simple as that. He was motivated to get money out of this fight. And boxing writer Richie Giannetti said, Larry didn't want to fight Ali. He knew Ali had nothing left, and he knew it would be a horror. And it was. It was horrible. And I remember the interview. It was either the interview before the Holmes fight or the interview before the Burbeck fight, where he sat in what looks like a throne with a pair of shades on, and he's talking, and he's storing a little bit with his words, and he's not speaking clearly, and he's like punch drunk. That's what he was like in this interview, and it's dead sad to watch. And the amount of times you go back and look at the different documentaries that include this interview, or even on YouTube, it's so sad to watch. It's like, somebody's suffering at this point, somebody's clearly struggling. Why let them go into the ring again? I don't understand why the people around him did let him go on to fight again, something that we'll never truly understand ourselves. But it's so difficult to watch because Larry Holmes obviously actually did a number on him. It was so sad to watch that particular fight, and really, really upsetting as a guy who's been an Ali fan all the way since he was born. And Ali obviously had way finished his career when I was born, so watching his career and watching him as a fight fan, it was really, really sad to watch the demise of him really as a fighter, really, really struggling against Larry Holmes, and yeah, it was just horrible to watch. Again, it's just one of them things where you think to yourself, just quit now, just call it a day. Just call it a day.
Yeah. If I remember rightly, Angelo Dundee was saying he was trying to tell him to not do the fight, and then Ali was adamant he wanted to do it. And Angelo Dundee sort of felt that, even if I'm not in his corner, I say, look, I'm going to walk away. Someone's going to give him the fight. You know what these people are like. You still get them today. You get these absolute pigs that just want to earn some money. And if you can stick Ali against anybody, even the situation, in the condition he was in, people will pay to watch it, and that's what it is. Money talks. So I think Angelo Dundee said, look, I'd rather be with him than not be there at all, because if anything does go wrong, I feel like I can step in and do something. So, but yeah, I mean, Larry Holmes, he was his sparring partner when he was like 18 years old. I think it was around the Norton fight, the very first Norton fight, that he came in, it was either that or it might have been the Fraser fight. I can't quite remember, but he came in as a sparring partner, a young lad, and so it was a massive deal for him. And if anyone recalls it, he was really upset after the fight, wasn't he? Because he just couldn't believe he just kept sort of hitting him, and it's just nothing coming back, and it saddened him to just see Ali in the condition he was in, and to go on and fight Berbick. I mean, Trevor Berbick, that's his claim to fame for me. I mean, Berbick will always be remembered to be a guy that beat Muhammad Ali, but that Ali was even worse than the Holmes fight. And I think at that point it was becoming very distasteful. And even no matter how much money you would throw at another Ali fight, I don't think anyone would have actually watched it. I think people would have probably protested against him ever stepping in the ring again. And I'm sure all the major boxing organisations, I can't think anyone would have wanted to grant us another fight after that Berbick fight, because that was awful. And in actual fact, I think I've watched about 2 rounds of that Berbick fight and I've turned it off. I don't think I've ever watched the whole fight. I can't come to terms with actually seeing Ali that way. And as you say, that famous interview with him sitting on the glasses, and you can see it's just, it's not right. He's not right at all. And thankfully, that was it. I'm pleased that was it in the end. And he managed to live on and still do some fantastic things.
He did. But the issue was obviously the Parkinson's. There's a lot of people and experts that say that it was at the point when he fought Larry Holmes that it really developed the onset of Parkinson's syndrome, and so essentially he was going in fighting Trevor Berbick with Parkinson's disease, basically, which it's an horrible disease for anybody to have. It's a motor neuron disease, so it basically affects your whole body, your ability, your mobility, your ability to speak, and obviously, as we've seen later on down the line with Ali, how bad he was, shaking, and he could hardly speak, and he was just such a brave man to suffer with it from all them years, to be honest with you, as he did. By the end of his boxing career, it was estimated that Ali had absorbed over 200,000 punches in his career. Now, that's a hell of a lot of punches to have absorbed.
Wow. That's unbelievable. Oh my goodness me. That shows, it just shows you how brutal boxing is. That's impressive. You saying that, I actually did a bit of maths, and I had Ali down. No, my maths ain't brilliant, so bear with me. But so I might be slightly out. But Ali fought 548 rounds in 61 fights, which was exactly 1,561 minutes, which was just over 26 hours in the ring.
Wow,
which is just crazy. So you saying that it took all them punches, and that's there are obviously guys in longer careers, but for Ali as a heavyweight to have accumulated that amount of fights and all them big fights is just saying something. It was just incredible. It really was.
I think we're going to talk about the stuff that happened outside of his career now. I think what we need to do is focus on some of the stuff that happened outside of his career, because we've talked a lot about what happened inside the ring. It's what happened outside the ring that I think transcended him as a man, and why probably people still consider him to be the greatest over guys like Sugar Ray Robinson. In terms of an overall package, not just a fighter in the ring. If you're judging someone inside and outside the ring, Ali tops them all because of the man he was. And there's just stories of some of the things that he had to do, and I think there's one story that sticks out in my mind, and there's quite a few of them. In 1984, Ali announced his support for the re-election of United States President Ronald Reagan. When asked to elaborate on his endorsement of Reagan, Ali told the reporters he's keeping God in schools and that's enough. In 1985, he visited Israel to request the release of Muslim prisoners at a detainee camp, which Israel initially declined. And then I think it was the 1991 that was really significant for me. In 1990, he travelled to Iraq. This was prior to the Gulf War, by the way, and he actually met with Saddam Hussein in an attempt to negotiate the release of American hostages. Ali actually secured the release of all the hostages in exchange for promising Hussein that he would bring America an honest account of Iraq. And that alone, for me, is part of why people love him. the fact that he was able to go over there to Saddam Hussein, he was obviously known as the dictator and a guy that was known as an evil person in a majority of the people's minds, and had this sort of stronghold over the country and the way he ran the country all the way up until his death. This was a guy who was just a boxer. This was a guy who's been in the ring, and the reputation outside of the ring had preceded him. He was able to go over to a hostile country like that, be welcomed with open arms, and then actually negotiate the release of hostages. Wow, that's a story in its own. That's just something that made him the man he was.
Oh, that's just incredible, isn't it? I mean, the way he was able to use his, his sporting. He's a sporting icon, and the way he was able to use that for the good, because that's what I believe that was the sort of person he was. He came from it was a basic upbringing. It wasn't a terrible upbringing of any sorts, but it was a comfortable upbringing. But he always made sure that when he did get to the point where where he was at, he was able to help people, and he always did. He was always the footage you ever see. He was always known to do magic tricks with the kids, didn't he? When they'd go and watch him, sort of sparring. Obviously the torch at the Olympics as well was a big thing. He also done the Winter Olympics as well in 2002. He lit the torch there, and yeah, I mean, as you say, I mean that's incredible. I've never heard that story, so that just makes again, you do the one thing with Arnie, you do find out other little bits, bits and pieces that you didn't know, and that's enlightening to hear that, and just shows you again, just as you rightly said there, Sean, that this guy is the greatest because of what he's done in and outside the ring, and that's what makes him so great, and just such a great person to watch and to just discuss and talk about. Well, I mean, what an amazing fighter, what an amazing guy.
The 1996 Olympics as well, when he actually came in and lit took the lit torch and basically opened the Olympic Games was a huge thing as well, because obviously it was watched by, I think it was something ridiculous like 3.5 billion people across the world, and Muhammad Ali, obviously full of his Parkinson's at the time, struggling to get it there, but managed to get it there, was quite an iconic moment, which is seen in quite a few of the documentaries that have been made about him. And even well after that, he was still involved in all sorts of different projects, and it was quite amazing to see how he was able to still be involved in so much, as much as he possibly could be, all the way up until the end, really. And I think that's what a lot of people had total respect for him for, was not just everything he did inside the ring, it's everything he did outside the ring as well. And I think for me that's what kind of made him like people say, the greatest, because of everything he was able to do inside and outside of the ring, and all the different stories and all the humanitarian work that he did outside of the ring was amazing. And when he actually passed away in 2016, there was people lining the streets up and down. The coverage on the TV networks worldwide was absolutely ridiculous. Literally every channel was just Ali. Everything was about Ali. There was not a channel that didn't have it on. Here in the UK, and obviously in the USA they have a lot more channels, so it was on every channel. And they had pallbearers including Will Smith, Lennox Lewis, Mike Tyson, with honorary pallbearers, Chuvalo, Larry Holmes and George Foreman, all the former opponents of him. And that was just basically the respect that he commanded as a man throughout all of the years. And it was quite a sad moment for boxing, and he was iconic, weren't he?
Yeah, really well. I mean, you even say that the relationship he built with Henry Cooper, and obviously when he went into Hall, did he go out? I don't think it was the Hall of Fame. I don't know if he was being inducted or if he had already been inducted and there was something else going on. But I do remember watching the news and seeing Henry Cooper and Muhammad Ali in the back of the convertible, and he had a great respect for England as well when he came for Britain in general, when he came over during the exile, just before it, especially with the Henry Cooper. And there was a guy, I can't think what it was, what documentary was. I did see something, but there was a guy over in, I'm not sure where he lived or what part of England it was, but he felt like, I think he just went in for a cup of tea with this geezer, just some random fan, and he was really humbled by how we treated him compared to how he was being treated in America. So he always had a love for England, or I keep saying England, but for Britain in general. And this guy that he had met and that he had a cup of tea with, he actually came back again a few years later and went straight knocked on his door and went for another cup of tea. And then there's famous pictures of him in there, and he's sort of taking some shots and sitting down having a cup of tea and just taking some shots of him rolling his wrists up. And again, I mean, that is just brilliant, isn't it? I mean, that guy must, you know, he must. That's just amazing for him. He didn't have social media like he did back then, like they do now today. Sorry. So yeah, another little story there where he just struck up friendships with random people. It doesn't matter where you are, what background wherever you come from. It didn't matter to him, and that is just Ali all over. And you know, that's just great. And it's just, again, I mean, he's just an amazing person and a great fighter, and just one that you won't ever see again. You know, you get these people in a lot of sports, whether it be, you know, like an Usain Bolt in athletics, or I can't think of anyone else off the top of my head, but these guys are just, they're like epic proportions. They're like, you know, they're beyond the sport. They transcend themselves beyond the sport with the stuff they do outside the ring as well. So yeah, it's brilliant, and a great one to start with for the career profiles.
It is a great one to start with for the career profiles. I've really enjoyed going through it, and I know we've had to skim over a lot of detail really, because there is hell of a lot of other information that we could sit here and talk about with Ali. And like I said to you off air, we could be here for 3-4 hours at a time recording a podcast, and I don't think people are going to want to sit here for 3 and 4 hours and listen to us as much as they might love listening to our podcast. They might not want to listen to us for 4 hours talk about the ins and outs of Muhammad Ali, especially obviously when it's widely available with all the different documentaries. We just wanted to give our interpretation of Ali, about his career, about what we think of him, about what he did inside and outside of the ring, and give our career profile of Muhammad Ali. And I think we've done a really good job, I think, and I think I've really enjoyed it, and I've really enjoyed speaking about Muhammad Ali, because as you can probably tell by both listening to myself and Johnston, you know, we're really passionate about the sport, we really love the sport, and this is a guy that's transcended it. And you know, you can never go anywhere without asking someone who Muhammad Ali is and they not know who he is. That is just telling you exactly. That just tells you how much the man transcended the sport for me. You go somewhere and you say, "Oh, do you know Muhammad Ali?" Yeah, that's it. If you're able to do that, and you know, get that response from somebody, then that just goes to show you that, you know, the legacy the man's left behind, especially even for the younger kids of today who's, you know, we was born past his era, and there's kids that are now, you know, growing up in the teens looking at Muhammad Ali as this absolute idol and watching his fights on YouTube, and you know, that is it, and that is the legacy he's left behind, and that legacy I don't think will ever die. And that's the beauty of what he did, and what, you know, he did for this sport, and what he did for not just the sport but for the whole movement of black people, the whole movement of civil rights, everything, you know, everything he, you know, partook in was always a meaning behind it. There was always a reason behind it, and it's one of them, like I said at the start of the episode, really, if you could have sat down with somebody, you know, on a table for half an hour, I think 9 times out of 10 most people would have picked someone like Muhammad Ali, especially a boxing fan. If you're a boxing fan, if you would have wanted to have sit down with a fighter past, present, Muhammad Ali's the one. There's nobody else. That's what it means to me. That's how I see it, and that's how I see most people's interpretation of it. We put posts out, who's the greatest fighter of all time, or who should be on the Mountain Rushmore of boxers. Muhammad Ali, always up there.
Always. He was just, you know, as I say, people that don't even know boxing, they know about Muhammad Ali because of what he done outside the ring as well as inside it. And, you know, his political views at times people didn't agree with. And he stuck by him, he stood by him. And he didn't, it actually made him more of a man, if you like. Just the way he carried himself in these interviews during his exile. And it was rubbing people up the wrong way at times, but he didn't care, and he kept going with it. He was getting, as we mentioned, you know, when he just changed his name. I mean, the guy's just changing his name, and people were threatening to kill him. Those were the era. That was a really terrible, tough era to be around, especially for a black guy sort of in the spotlight. And as you know, I'm not going to sort of disrespect Floyd Patterson, but Floyd Patterson was that guy that they expected everybody to be like, you know, and he didn't fit that mold. He wasn't going to do that, and that's great, and that's what he's able. The young kids can look at Muhammad Ali today, and you know, there's nothing wrong with going against the grain. Sometimes if you don't agree with something and you really believe strongly enough that actually, no, I'm right, there's nothing wrong with sticking by it. Just because everybody else is against you, just stand by it. You know, eventually people will follow and people will understand and people will agree with you at times. Sometimes you might not even be right at the end of it. But to have that ability about you and to stand there and say, do you know what, I'm gonna stick by what I agree, and this is what it's gonna, this is, you know, whatever happens, this is what I believe. And that's what he did, and I think that is a massive part of it. And then from that point, people loved him and adored him even more. And then, you know, what he'd done in the ring was amazing. And then obviously beyond that, and what he's done and what you was mentioning there, we're going to see Saddam and getting American prisoners released. I mean, that's crazy, isn't it? I mean, that's just unbelievable. So, yeah, if any young kids who, you know, just seen the Thriller in Manila and the Rumble in the Jungle, go and watch some more of his fights, go and watch his interviews, and you could spend a whole day watching Muhammad Ali. I've done it before. I've done it several times because he's just that type of guy, and you could listen to him all day long, and I could quite easily, to be fair, because he was just amazing person and a great fighter.
Certainly was, and it's been an absolute pleasure covering this episode and the first of the series in Career Profiles. If you've enjoyed it, please let us know. If you feel there's any amendments we can do to make it better, please let us know. If you didn't like it, also let us know. We want to make things better for you guys, the listeners. We want to give you great content to listen to while you're sat there typing away on your keyboards at work, or you've got that long drive to somewhere where you need to go, or that long bus ride, whatever it is. We want to be there to provide you all this quality boxing content. So any feedback is really, really appreciated. It allows us then to work on new ideas, new things like this. So Career Profiles, if you enjoyed it, let us know. We're going to be putting polls out every week for the Career Profile series. We're going to be picking some of the greatest fighters of all time, and we're going to be doing what we've done tonight, which is Career Profile them. Let's talk about the fights that he was in, significant fights, significant actions inside and outside of the ring, whether they were good actions, whether they were bad actions. We're going to cover it all. Johnston, been a pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
Same here, mate. It really has been a pleasure, and look forward to the poll and seeing who we get next.
Yeah, definitely. So guys, please, as always, go and follow us on social media at BTR Boxing Pod on Twitter and BTR Boxing Podcast on Facebook as well. Please rate us on Apple Podcasts. Let us know what you think about the podcast in general. If you're not on Apple Podcasts, go on any of the good podcasting apps out there and rate us on there. Subscribe to us. We really, really appreciate all the support and the love that we get from all you listeners out there. And this was it. This was the Career Profile of the greatest, Muhammad Ali.
He would come to the gym, and if he didn't get a ride to the gym, he didn't have no car, he would run. He would run across the causeway.
Muhammad Ali, one of my great heroes, had a great line in the 70s when he was asked, how many sit-ups do you do? He said, I don't count my sit-ups. I only start counting when it starts hurting. When I feel pain, that's when I start counting, because that's when it really counts. That's what makes you a champion.
Jerry, I'm the greatest fighter that ever stepped foot in the ring. Money will be lost that night. This will be the biggest upset in the century of all boxing.
I think you're a big bag of wind. Damnedest showman that ever lived, and you ain't kidding anybody.
The odds are 7-1. It's very big odds for a heavyweight championship fight.
It has to be Liston. Liston is a much bigger puncher.
Well, all these big mouth people talking about I talk too much, well, I want all of them to be there, and I'm going to shut up all of his mouth.
And Cassius Clay has won after 6 rounds.
Cassius is not my name no more.
You want to keep calling me a white man's name? I'm not white.
Continues to scream at Terrell.
He beat the hell out of those who didn't want to use his name.
Mr. Muhammad Ali has just refused to be inducted into the United States Armed Forces.
I'm just about broke. I'm not allowed to work here now in America.
I'm going to fight not for me, but to uplift my little brothers who are sleeping in concrete floors today in America.
They want to be famous. They have people. It's a wonderful, wonderful.
I'm going to float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. George can't hit what his eyes can't see. All of you chumps are going to bow when I whoop him. All of you. I know you got him. I know you got him picked. But the man's in trouble. I'm going to show you how great I am.
Bluffed him. I done everything. Beat him up basically for about 5 or 6 rounds. I thought it was easy. Then about the 6th round, he whispered in my ear after I'd hit him in the side, "That all you got, George?"
And never talk about who's going to stop me. Well, ain't nobody going to stop me. I must be the greatest. I shook up the world. I shook up the world. I told you, all of my critics, that I was the greatest of all time.
He who is not courageous enough to take risks will accomplish nothing in life. When you were a kid, you always bet certain fellas, I'm gonna be champion one day, and when I'm champion, I'm gonna come back and show you I'm wrong. Another said, guys, I'm gonna be a great doctor one day, and I'm gonna be a dentist, I'm gonna be a great scientist, I'm gonna be a president of the country. But very few people actually are able to make good of the boast and come home and say, I told you.